Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, I'm bringing you 4 deeply disturbing Reddit posts that went viral for all the wrong reasons. These aren't just creepy stories people made up for internet points. These are real posts from real people who stumbled into situations they couldn't explain, discovered things they wish they hadn't, or revealed details that made the entire internet question what was really happening. Before we dive in, I want to know, have you ever come across a Reddit post that made you genuinely uncomfortable? One that you couldn't stop thinking about for days? Drop a comment and share. Sometimes the most terrifying things aren't in horror movies, they're buried in archived Reddit threads, waiting to be discovered. These stories will make you question what's really happening in your own neighborhood, what might be hidden beneath your feet, or who might be watching from places you'd never think to look. Alright, let's begin. And remember, everything you're about to hear actually happened. Story 1. The Wi-Fi networks under the concrete. On April 21, 2016, a Reddit user posted something in the Black Ops 3 subreddit that would spiral into one of the internet's most bizarre unsolved mysteries. The title was simple but deeply unsettling. Why would there be 30-ish Wi-Fi networks seemingly emanating from under a concrete pad? The user explained that he'd recently been living on a semi-urban farm property in Hawaii for a few months. During his time there, he'd noticed several unusual things that he was hesitant to reveal in detail. But one thing stood out above all else. There were approximately 25 to 30 low-strength Wi-Fi networks somewhere in the neighborhood. Now, at first glance, that might not seem particularly strange. Most of us live in areas where our devices can detect multiple Wi-Fi networks from surrounding homes and businesses. But what made this situation deeply weird was that all of these networks were exactly the same signal strength, all peaking at exactly the same point location. And that point location appeared to be underneath a concrete pad on the property. A pad that, according to the user, had been constructed simply to cover gravel and dirt. There was no building on top of it, no obvious structure. Just a flat concrete pad in the middle of the property. The user decided to investigate further. He downloaded a Wi-Fi analyzer app to rule out the possibility that this was just some bizarre coincidence where multiple neighborhood networks happened to have similar signal strength based on their distances from various routers. He walked in circles around the property while operating the Wi-Fi analyzer, carefully tracking how the signal strength changed. And what he discovered was undeniable. As he moved away from a specific point on the concrete pad, the signal from all 30 networks grew weaker. When he moved back toward that point, they all grew stronger simultaneously. The networks were definitely originating from beneath the concrete. But it got even stranger. The user noticed that these network SIDs, the names of the Wi-Fi networks, would change every 5 minutes or so. They weren't static. It was as if someone was deliberately rotating through different network names to avoid detection or identification. Determined to get to the bottom of this mystery, the user obtained a thermal imaging device to detect hot spots on the ground. He scanned the entire concrete pad and found one area that was noticeably hotter than the surrounding concrete. He decided to drill directly on top of that hot spot, along with several other holes in different areas as controls. Then he filled all the holes with water to see what would happen. The results were shocking. Only the hole directly above the hot spot drained the water. The others overflowed and pooled on the surface. Something beneath that specific point was drawing the water down, which meant there was definitely hollow space under the concrete, and something down there was generating heat. Other Reddit users started asking questions, trying to help solve the mystery. Someone asked if there were any power sources nearby that could be feeding electricity to whatever was underneath the concrete. The user responded that there were power lines on the property, but they were disconnected from the city's main electrical grid. However, there was a very wealthy neighbor who owned a large steel frame building, and the power cables from the pad ran directly to that building. He also mentioned something that added an eerie historical context. The entire mountain area had been used by the military during World War II. While there were no officially documented military bases at that specific location according to militarybases.com, the user said he had no doubt there were underground facilities somewhere in the area. The geography and history supported it. One Redditor asked for photos of the surrounding area, hoping visual evidence might provide more clues. The user delivered, and the photos only deepened the mystery. One image showed a multi-breaker electrical setup where the lower conduit ran under asphalt and toward the exact point where the Wi-Fi signals peaked, the same location as the thermal hotspot. Another photo showed the water-filled hole that had drained so mysteriously. But perhaps the most unsettling image was of a large plastic bucket found on the property. The user noted, somewhat darkly, that it reminded him of the hydrofluoric acid body disposal scene from Breaking Bad, a reference that made other users deeply uncomfortable. Someone asked if there was any way to measure the thickness of the concrete pad. If heat was genuinely coming from below, they reasoned, you'd expect it to dissipate evenly across the surface rather than remain focused on one specific hot spot. The user posted another photo showing that the concrete pad was approximately twice as thick as the surrounding paved areas. He explained that it was extremely hard to drill through, much harder than normal concrete, and appeared to have river rocks mixed into the material. The surrounding areas, by contrast, were easy to drill through with a standard hammer drill and masonry bit. As he attempted to drill closer to the hotspot location, he managed to reach a depth of about 2 feet. But he said the heat at that depth was unbearable. He compared it to sticking your hand inside an active composting bin, but there were no signs of microbial activity or decomposition. The soil was red volcanic dirt, which, according to him, shouldn't support much biological activity anyway. That's where that particular comment chain ended. But there were other developments. Another user asked if it was possible to connect to any of the Wi-Fi access points or gain control of the devices broadcasting them. If he could identify a manufacturer, it might provide clues about what kind of equipment was down there and who had installed it. The same user also asked whether the power meter on the property was moving significantly, which would indicate it was actively powering multiple devices underground. The original poster replied that he tried to crack the passwords on the Wi-Fi networks but failed. He didn't specifically mention the power meter, but he did provide photos of the general area where he suspected heat vents might be hidden, disguised as ordinary drainage or ventilation structures. In the same thread, it was noted that the steel building on the neighboring property had been partially constructed by contractors with questionable reputations. Large underground liquid storage tanks had recently been removed from the area, meaning there had to be significant underground space available, space that could theoretically be repurposed. Even more suspicious, a municipal storm drain near the property had been recently demolished and replaced with a much larger one positioned directly opposite the property line. The user believed this could serve as a covert entrance to whatever underground facility existed beneath the concrete pad. Then the user shared 2 additional details that made everything even more sinister. First, he said that on multiple occasions, he'd seen a truck making late-night trips to remove large amounts of broken, new-looking concrete from the neighbors' trash bins. Why would someone need to dispose of so much concrete in the middle of the night? And why did it look new? Second, and this is where things took a truly dark turn, the user discovered that his old boss's eBay account was linked to a seller going by the name Chebei, which had extremely suspicious reviews and feedback. When other Reddit users started investigating the Chebei account, the feedback and reviews were suddenly set to private. Someone was clearly monitoring the Reddit thread and trying to cover their tracks. When asked if he felt safe after making these discoveries public, the user stated that he was in a pretty good spot, and that they wouldn't get him easily. The use of the word "they" implied he knew exactly who was behind the underground facility, and that he considered them dangerous. The Chebei eBay account had a history of selling strange items: faulty hard drives, broken electronics, damaged computer components. Who buys broken hard drives except for people looking to recover deleted data? Or people involved in illegal activities who need to dispose of incriminating evidence. But the story takes an even darker turn. Some internet investigators began linking the entire situation to Pizzagate, the conspiracy theory that exploded during the 2016 US presidential election. The theory claimed that high-ranking members of the Democratic Party were involved in a pedophilia ring, and that coded language in leaked emails referred to child trafficking. While the Pizzagate conspiracy was widely debunked, the connection to the Hawaii property and the Chebei eBay account added fuel to online speculation. People started wondering if the underground facility was being used for something illegal, data storage, cryptocurrency mining, or something far worse. And then, just as suddenly as it started, everything went silent. It was later reported that the original Reddit user allegedly suffered from mental health issues. His former boss actually commented on one of the threads, claiming the user had a history of paranoid behavior, including ripping out his ceiling fan because he believed he was being surveilled. The boss also claimed there was no real connection between his eBay account and the Chebei seller, and that the user had fabricated the link as part of a delusional episode. Of course, the boss could have been lying. Almost everything the original user discussed had some form of photographic evidence attached. The thermal imaging, the drilled holes, the electrical setup, the concrete thickness. These weren't the ravings of someone completely detached from reality. So what was really underneath that concrete pad in Hawaii? Was it an old military bunker from World War II that had been repurposed for something secret? A cryptocurrency mining operation drawing massive amounts of electricity and generating heat? A data storage facility for illegal materials? Or was it something far worse? something that the wealthy neighbor, the questionable contractors, and the mysterious nighttime concrete disposal were all designed to hide? To this day, the mystery remains unsolved. The Reddit account has been deleted. The Chebei eBay seller is no longer active. And whatever is generating 30 Wi-Fi signals beneath a concrete pad in Hawaii is still there, still broadcasting, still hidden. Story 2. The blood spatter that didn't make sense. On Tuesday, December 16, 2025, just a few weeks ago, a Reddit user posted something in the home maintenance subreddit that was disturbing enough for moderators to delete it within an hour. Fortunately, the post was recovered by someone who had taken a screenshot before it was removed. They sent it to me on December 23rd, and after reviewing it, I understood immediately why it had been deleted. The post read, "I have cut myself pretty badly in my rented apartment. Fortunately, everything is all right, but I don't really want to notify the owners of damage on the walls. What would I need to make this disappear?" Attached was a photo. You don't have to look at the picture for long to realize this wasn't a normal injury. The blood spatter on the wall was oddly shaped and positioned, not consistent with someone accidentally cutting themselves while cooking or doing home repairs. It was a spray pattern, high up on the wall, arcing across the surface in a way that suggested violent force. There was also a noticeable chip in the wall, right in the center of the thickest part of the blood spatter. The pattern and the wall damage together implied that the blood wasn't sprayed onto the wall by accident. It was the result of something or someone hitting the wall with significant force. The original poster was extremely vague about how he'd supposedly cut himself. He never explained what he was doing when the injury occurred, what object had caused it, or why the blood ended up several feet up the wall in a spray pattern rather than dripping down from a wound. When other users pressed him for details, he didn't respond. He simply asked again what cleaning products would remove blood from drywall without leaving a stain. That alone would be suspicious enough. But other Reddit users started digging into the poster's account history, and what they found was deeply concerning. The user was known to post frequently in the r/alcoholism subreddit. In multiple posts, he admitted to getting drunk 5 days a week on average. He described blacking out regularly, getting into fights while intoxicated, and struggling to maintain relationships because of his drinking. But there was one post in particular that stood out. About a month before the blood spatter post, the user had written a long, emotional post about his girlfriend leaving him. According to his account, she cheated on him and ended the relationship specifically because of his drinking problem. The timing was brutal. She left him just days before the engagement ring he'd ordered for her arrived in the mail. He posted a photo of the ring still in its box, asking what he should do with it now that she was gone. The post was filled with anger, bitterness, and resentment. He talked about how much money he'd wasted on her, how she'd betrayed him, how he'd done everything right, and she'd thrown it away. Some users tried to offer sympathy. Others pointed out that his drinking problem was probably a legitimate reason for her to leave, and that he needed to focus on getting sober rather than dwelling on the breakup. But he didn't take the advice well. He became defensive, argumentative, hostile toward anyone who suggested he might be at fault. Then, about 3 weeks later, he went silent. No posts, no comments, nothing. Until the blood spatter photo appeared. After the original post was deleted from the home maintenance subreddit, someone posted about it in r/RBI, the Reddit Bureau of Investigation, a community dedicated to solving internet mysteries. The person who reposted it laid out the timeline. User's girlfriend leaves him due to his alcoholism. User posts angry, resentful messages about her betrayal. User goes silent for 3 weeks. User suddenly posts a photo of a violent blood spatter in his apartment, claiming it's from cutting himself. User is extremely vague about how the injury occurred. User is more concerned with hiding the damage from his landlord than seeking medical attention. The RBI community immediately flagged the post as suspicious. Several users suggested contacting local police in the poster's area, but the problem was he'd never revealed his exact location. One user decided to reach out to the original poster privately, asking if he was okay and if he needed help. The poster's response? He immediately blocked the user. Why would someone block a person trying to offer help unless they had something to hide? At this point, multiple theories started circulating. Theory 1. The poster had gotten drunk and injured himself badly, possibly by falling or hitting his head, and was now trying to cover it up to avoid losing his security deposit. Theory 2. The poster had gotten drunk and violently destroyed part of his apartment in a fit of rage over the breakup, and the blood was his own from punching the wall or throwing something. Theory 3. The darkest theory, that the poster had done something terrible to his ex-girlfriend when she came to collect her belongings or when he confronted her about the cheating. The blood spatter pattern and the wall damage suggested impact trauma. Someone or something had hit that wall hard enough to chip the drywall and create a spray pattern. And the fact that the poster was so desperate to hide the evidence rather than explain what happened made people deeply uneasy. Several RBI users tried to track down more information. They combed through his post history looking for identifying details. City names, landmarks, workplace references, anything that might indicate where he lived. They found a few vague references to living in the Pacific Northwest, possibly Oregon or Washington. One comment mentioned rain and mountains, another referenced a local brewery by name. But it wasn't enough to pinpoint a specific location or contact local authorities. The user's account has since been deleted entirely. All of his posts, including the breakup posts, the alcoholism posts, and the blood spatter photo, are gone. The only reason we even know about this story is because people took screenshots before everything disappeared. So what really happened in that apartment? Was it just a drunk man who injured himself and panicked about the damage? Or was it something far darker? A crime scene that the poster was desperately trying to clean up before anyone found out what he'd done? The blood spatter, the chip in the wall, the spray pattern, the desperate need to hide the evidence, the suspicious timing with the ex-girlfriend leaving him, the sudden deletion of his entire account. All of it points to something deeply wrong. But without more information, without a location, without confirmation that anyone is safe or in danger, there's nothing anyone can do. This mystery remains unsolved. And somewhere out there, someone knows exactly what happened in that apartment. Story 3, the 70-year-old neighbor in the attic. This story comes from a Reddit post made in 2016 by a user named randomgirl2, and it remains one of the most disturbing squatter cases ever documented online. The user lived in a fairly large house in a remote rural area, population about 400 people. It was the kind of small town where everyone knew everyone, where people didn't lock their doors during the day, where crime was virtually non-existent. She lived alone, which she'd always enjoyed. Her bedroom had a door that led outside to a small porch, giving her easy access to the outdoors without going through the rest of the house. She was meticulous about cleanliness. Her floors were made of ebony-stained wood that showed even the smallest speck of dirt or dust, so she swept them constantly, sometimes multiple times a day. One afternoon, while doing her usual cleaning routine, she found something that stopped her cold. A tooth. It was sitting on the floor, right in front of the bedroom door that led outside. A human tooth, complete with the root still attached like it had been knocked out or pulled out. She stood there, frozen, trying to process what she was seeing. Had it been there earlier? She was certain it hadn't. She'd swept that exact spot just an hour before. She ran her tongue over her own teeth, checking to see if she'd somehow lost one without noticing. But all of her teeth were intact. So where had this tooth come from? She posted about it on Reddit and the responses came quickly. People suggested everything from the mundane, maybe a previous tenant had lost it years ago and it had been stuck in a crack, to the deeply unsettling, maybe someone else had been in her house and lost it recently. One commenter asked a question that would change everything. Do you have an attic? Have you checked it recently? The thought had never occurred to her. Why would anyone be in her attic? But the more she thought about it, the more things started making sense. Items had been going missing from her house over the past several months. Small things she'd assumed she'd misplaced. Objects would be in different positions than where she'd left them. She'd hear occasional sounds at night that she'd attributed to the house settling or animals in the walls. Living alone meant there was no one to verify her suspicions or confirm that something was wrong. She'd convinced herself she was being paranoid or forgetful. But the tooth was undeniable proof that someone else had been there. Despite multiple people warning her not to investigate alone, she decided she couldn't wait. It would take too long for anyone to arrive in her remote location, and she needed to know. She found a tall ladder and positioned it beneath the attic access panel. As she climbed up, her heart was pounding so hard she thought she might pass out. She pushed open the attic panel and shined a flashlight inside. At first she couldn't see much, just dusty wooden beams and insulation. But as her eyes adjusted, she saw them. Objects. Things that shouldn't be there. Evidence that someone had been living in her attic. She wasn't tall enough to fully pull herself up into the attic from where she was standing, so she could only peek slightly past the opening. But what she could see was enough to confirm her worst fear. Someone had been up there. She quickly retreated, posted an update on Reddit, and decided to get a taller ladder and a better flashlight before investigating further. The comments section exploded. People begged her to call the police immediately, to not go back up there alone, to leave the house and wait for help. But she explained that she worked in law enforcement for the state's Game and Fish Commission. She was trained for dangerous situations. She'd dealt with armed poachers, aggressive wildlife, and hostile individuals in remote locations. She could handle this. Still, she admitted she was a smallish woman living in the middle of nowhere, and the thought of confronting whoever had been living above her head was terrifying. In her next update, she confirmed that someone had definitely been living in her attic, but they weren't present at the time she investigated. The items she found were deeply disturbing. 8 beer koozies. Some of her own personal belongings that had gone missing months ago. A pile of loose change. A $20 bill. And that was just what she could see from the entrance. She called the police, who arrived within the hour. Impressive response time for such a remote area, but the sheriff apparently knew her personally from her work with fish and game. Officers climbed into the attic and began documenting everything. They dusted for fingerprints, photographed the scene, and collected items as evidence. What they told her next made her blood run cold. Someone has been visiting your attic for a very, very long time. Not days. Not weeks. Potentially months or even years. After the police left, she installed new locks on every door and window. She started locking her doors during the day, something she'd never done before in such a small, safe community. But then the police told her something that made the situation exponentially worse. The intruder only visited the attic when she was home. Not when she was away at work. Not when the house was empty. Only when she was there. This wasn't a squatter looking for free shelter. This was a stalker. Someone who wanted to be near her, to watch her, to listen to her. The case was officially reclassified from a burglary to a stalking investigation. And it got worse. She started receiving unsolicited explicit photos sent to her phone. The number was always different, always untraceable, always sent late at night when she was alone in the house. She never confirmed publicly who sent them, but the timing was too suspicious to be a coincidence. The police eventually went through all the evidence they'd collected from the attic, and what they found was beyond disturbing. There were 2 large pickle jars, the kind you'd get from a restaurant supplier, that had been used to collect the intruder's semen. They were nearly full. There were thousands of used tissues scattered around the attic space. Towelettes. Socks that had been used and discarded. And then there were her clothes. Underwear, bras, tank tops. Items that had been missing from her laundry for over a year. Some still had visible stains on them. It was clear what the intruder had been doing with them. There were also bizarre objects with no clear purpose. A plastic butterfly, a wooden bobblehead turtle, more beer koozies, and black and pink straps with Velcro on the ends. The last item was particularly disturbing. No one could determine what it was meant for, but the implications were horrifying. The sheer volume of evidence made one thing clear. This had been going on for a very long time. The intruder had been coming and going, living part-time in her attic, for potentially years without her knowing. Then finally she got the call. The police had identified the intruder. They'd matched fingerprints and tracked him down. She expected it to be a drifter, maybe a homeless person she'd never met, someone passing through town. But the truth was so much worse. It was her 70-year-old neighbor. The man who lived 3 houses down the road. The church deacon. The man who'd been married to the same woman for 40 years. The father of 4 grown children. The grandfather of 6. The man she'd waved to countless times when driving past his house. The man who'd helped her jumpstart her car once. The man she'd trusted because he was a pillar of the community. He'd been climbing into her attic through the exterior access panel on her roof, something she'd never thought to check or secure because who would even think to look there? He'd been doing it for years. Watching her sleep, listening to her phone conversations, stealing her clothes, pleasuring himself in her attic while she lived her life completely unaware just below him. The police arrested him, but there's no public record of what happened after that. The original Reddit user deleted her account shortly after revealing the stalker's identity, likely because people in her small town had figured out who she was. There were no news articles, no follow-up posts, no court records that anyone could find. The story just ends there. But the message is clear. It doesn't matter how safe your town is, how well you know your neighbors, or how unlikely it seems that someone would target you. Lock your doors. Check your attic. Install security cameras. Because sometimes the most dangerous person is the one you'd never suspect. Story 4. The Underground Room Beneath the Bridge. This final story comes from a post in the famous r/Let's Not Meet subreddit, and the original poster's account has since been deleted, likely for good reason. From what we can gather from the archived post, the story involves an adolescent male from North Wales, UK, a region known for its stunning natural beauty, rugged coastlines, and sparse population. But like many rural areas, there isn't much for teenagers to do. The daily routine mostly involved agricultural work, herding animals, harvesting crops, picking fruit, and for teenagers full of energy and curiosity, that lifestyle can feel suffocating. So out of boredom, the original poster and a few of his friends would often explore the countryside and coastline, looking for abandoned buildings, hidden caves, or anything that broke up the monotony. There was a major road running along the coast from Wales to England, a two-lane carriageway with train tracks running parallel to it for most of the way. Occasionally, the train tracks would pass overhead via small cement bridges. One night, the poster and 3 of his friends decided to explore one of these bridges more closely. They'd walked past it dozens of times but had never really examined it. When they reached the bridge, they noticed something unusual: a manhole cover on the ground nearby, partially obscured by overgrown grass and weeds. They'd never noticed it before, probably because no one pays attention to manhole covers. But now that they'd seen it, they were curious. Where did it lead? What was it for? Upon closer inspection, they realized it wasn't a standard utility access cover. It was smaller, older, and had no markings indicating what it was for. No electric company or water department labels like you'd normally see. They tried to pry it open with their hands but quickly realized it was bolted shut from the inside. They'd need tools. So they returned the following night, prepared with crowbars and wrenches they'd borrowed from one of the boys' father's garage. Unbolting the cover wasn't easy. They had to work quietly because the train tracks were right next to them. Not close enough to be dangerous, but close enough that train conductors could spot them and potentially alert the police. After about 15 minutes of struggling, they managed to loosen the bolts. They lifted the heavy steel disc and peered down into the darkness below. A ladder descended into blackness. They couldn't see the bottom. Without discussing it much, because teenage boys rarely think things through, they climbed down one by one. When they reached the bottom, they found themselves in a narrow, low-ceilinged passage leading deeper into the structure. The walls were concrete, damp with condensation and covered in grime. They moved slowly, crouching and squeezing through the confined space. Their phones provided the only light, casting eerie shadows on the walls. They'd always assumed the bridge was just solid concrete and steel, a functional structure with no interior space. But now they were inside it, navigating a passage that seemed to extend the entire length of the bridge. The journey was claustrophobic and uncomfortable. They had to crawl in some sections, scraping their stomachs and backs against the rough concrete. But they pressed on, driven by curiosity and the thrill of exploring somewhere forbidden. About halfway through the passage, they reached a section where narrow gaps in the floor allowed them to look down at the road below. Cars passed beneath them, completely unaware that 4 teenagers were watching from inside the bridge structure above. That should have been the end of the adventure. They'd satisfied their curiosity, discovered a secret passage, and could now turn back and tell their friends about it. But then one of the boys said he could see something at the far end of the passage, something that didn't look like just more concrete wall. Against their better judgment, they decided to investigate. The original poster was the first to reach the end of the walkway. What he found there filled him with a dread unlike anything he'd ever experienced in his young life. There was a single folding chair positioned against the wall, facing directly toward them. On the wall, at eye level if you were sitting in the chair, was a partially torn page from a magazine showing a fully nude woman in an erotic pose. But it wasn't a normal pin-up photo. The woman's eyes had been violently cut out of the page, like someone had taken a knife and gouged them out, leaving ragged holes where her eyes should have been. Below the picture, on the floor directly beneath the chair, was a used condom. It was clearly visible even in the dim light from their phones, and there was no mistaking what it was or that it had been recently used based on the liquid still inside. The boys stood there in stunned silence for maybe 3 seconds, long enough to process what they were seeing, long enough to understand that someone had been using this hidden space for something deeply disturbing. Then they ran. They scrambled back through the passage as fast as they could, scraping their skin against the walls, not caring about the pain, driven by pure animal panic. The entire way back, they silently prayed that the manhole cover was still open, that whoever used the space hadn't returned and sealed them inside while they were exploring. When they reached the ladder, they didn't stop to catch their breath. They climbed up as fast as possible, burst out of the manhole and ran. They didn't stop running until they were nearly a mile away, gasping for air, hands on their knees, trying to process what they'd just seen. The reason the original poster emphasized the sparse population and the small-town nature of North Wales was this. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where anything weird or criminal would be hard to hide for long, where this kind of behavior should have been impossible to conceal. But someone had found a secret space, a space that probably no one else even knew existed, and was using it for something sinister. In the end, being naive teenage boys, they never told anyone what they'd found. Not their parents, not the police, not even their other friends. They were scared of getting in trouble for trespassing. Scared of being called liars. Scared of not being believed. But the original poster admitted years later, when he finally posted the story on Reddit, that they should have reported it. Because what they'd found wasn't the behavior of a healthy-minded person. It was the behavior of someone dangerous. The story ends there, but the poster did mention that he returned to the location a few times over the years, hoping to find some kind of resolution or closure. Each time, the manhole cover was still there, still accessible. But he never went back inside. He'd learned his lesson. He also mentioned that he tried to research the bridge's history, to see if there were any historical records explaining why there was an interior passage and a hidden room. He found nothing. No blueprints, no construction records, nothing indicating that the space was intentionally designed or officially documented. Which means either it was a secret from the beginning, perhaps a military structure from World War II or the Cold War, or someone had created it themselves, carving out a hidden space where they could indulge their darkest impulses without anyone knowing. The poster never discovered who had been using the room. Never found out what had happened to the woman whose image was on the wall. Never learned whether this was a one-time incident or part of a pattern. But he knows what he saw. And he'll never forget the feeling of standing in that underground room, staring at the mutilated photo and the used condom, knowing that someone had been down there recently, knowing that they might return at any moment. And neither will anyone who read his story. 4 Reddit posts. 4 disturbing mysteries. For situations where people stumbled into something they couldn't explain and shared it with the internet, hoping for answers. Some of these mysteries may never be solved. Some may have been solved quietly with no public resolution. Some may still be ongoing, waiting for the right person to dig deep enough to uncover the truth. I want to thank everyone who archives these stories, who takes screenshots before posts are deleted, who investigates when everyone else has moved on. These stories matter because they remind us that the strangest, most unsettling things aren't always fiction. Sometimes they're just buried in a Reddit thread, waiting to be discovered. If you found these stories compelling, please like and subscribe. And if you've ever come across a disturbing Reddit post that you think deserves more attention, drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Stay curious, stay skeptical. And remember, not everything that gets deleted from the internet deserves to be forgotten. Some things need to be remembered. Some questions need to keep being asked. Until next time.